Hello and welcome to Türkiye Talks. This week we are going to talk about Astana Talks on Syria. It's a platform organized by Russians, and also Turkey is involved, and basically Syrian political process and other issues are being discussed. I am joined by Kadir Üstün from Washington and Ömer Özkızılcık from Istanbul. Welcome to the show.
Hi, brother.
Hi. Let's start with you, Ömer. Also, there is another issue related to Syria, which is the expected Turkish operation against YPG and PKK terror groups. So let's start with Astana Talks, if you like. The 18th round of talks started in Nur Sultan city in Kazakhstan. The constitution is on the table. Also, the return of refugees and many other issues are being discussed by the delegations. What is your opinion about this, Ömer? Do you think there will be a solution to the constitution issue and other issues? Because it's a very complicated situation in Syria, and it's been more than 10 years. What should we expect from these talks?
So we have to clearly assess that the early days of the Astana talks are over, in which Turkey, Russia, and Iran were negotiating on active mechanisms on the ground in Syria, as we had an active escalation ongoing inside Syria, and there was an active war happening. But as the Astana process was relatively successful, and many somehow succeeded in ending conflicts or reducing tensions in the region, it turned into a more political mechanism than the previous period, in which it had serious decisions for the military side of the conflict. But the political side is progressing very slowly, and it's going on step by step. It's not like the military decisions, where a decision can be implemented in a short period of time, but in the political resolution process and negotiations, it requires more time, unfortunately. And here we see that the sides are still investing heavily on trust-building measures. There was the exchange of prisoners between the Assad regime and the legitimate Syrian opposition. And we have that the situation that the Astana talks is with the Constitutional Committee formed by the Astana process, the only area in which the Syrian opposition and the Assad regime come somehow together and speak about the matters of Syria and test themselves. And Turkey, Russia, and Iran are trying to mediate and guarantee the process. And this is the last and only ongoing process. So, however, in this Astana talks, we have seen that there was an interesting part from the Assad regime side, as the Assad regime has used these Astana talks to oppose a possible new Turkish-Syrian military operation in Syria, and has made clear its opposition to such a new military operation against the YPG inside Syria. In addition to that, we have to see that the Constitutional Committee talks between the Syrian opposition, the NGOs, and the Assad regime are stalling, and they are not progressing anywhere, as the Assad regime is systematically preventing any progress and any steps forward. And this Astana talks will be used and are being used to overcome the difficulties there. Turkey is trying to convince Russia to put on more pressure on the Assad regime, and to actually begin working on the constitution itself. It's over 2 years now, and still it was not possible for the Syrian opposition, the NGOs, and the Assad regime to talk about one article of the constitution. And this has to change if we want a political solution in Syria.
Maybe we should remind our viewers that Astana process started in 2016, and it is another track of negotiations. In the beginning, there was the Geneva process under UN, and basically Western powers were involved. And this is another track, as you said, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, after Moscow Declaration in 2016, another process started in Syria. And it actually delivered many outcomes like a ceasefire in North, de-escalation zones, and many other things after Moscow Declaration. Kadir, do you think this time, this round of talks can produce more positive results as it did in the previous time? But also, we should also remind our viewers that it's problematic. Sometimes there are agreements, there are some ideas which the parties agreed on, but it's not reflected to the field. So what's your expectations?
Bora, when we look at the structure of this Astana process, it has turned into a conflict management mechanism, largely. The issues on the table, including the political process, which is taking place in Geneva, constitutional writing process, and then human rights issues, humanitarian access issues, exchange of prisoners, like Ömer mentioned, and military issues. These are all being discussed within this framework, but the participants, Turkey, Russia, Iran, the Assad regime, the opposition, they're managing this conflict, what's happening on the ground, and what the sort of fallout from the conflict. But at the same time, there's no big sort of political framework that they're trying to get at in an urgent manner. So when that doesn't happen, the big, players on the ground, they're not pushing for a specific kind of solution, a political solution, but they're trying to manage the conflict with its all complications, including the military, political, and humanitarian, while also trying to protect their national interests on the ground. So, and every meeting, I think we do get some positive news, progress, let's say, of certain things, including what Ömer mentioned just Monday, I believe, on the 13th of June, there was some exchange of prisoners. So that kind of can help build confidence and trust on both sides, but it's nothing large scale. So we shouldn't expect from this process a big sort of piece of news to, arrive at a broader solution, but a lot of piecemeal steps. And of course, lately, Turkey has been talking about intervention in northern Syria because its goal is to create this 30-kilometer deep safe zone for itself, for its border. And I'm sure that will come up. But that is something that, that is in the national interest of Turkey. And then on the ground, you have military players like, the Russians and Iranians and the regime, etc. That is not necessarily resolved through the Astana process. That I'm sure it comes up, but that is more sort of within the domain of these countries' national interests, how they see it, etc. So in terms of conflict management, this process has already been successful, but will it produce a lasting political solution for Syria? I'm not so positive about that, and I don't think that's quite the goal of those meetings in Astana at this point anyway.
One of the issues which is being discussed is return of refugees, and we all know without any political solution, it is very difficult for many people, for millions, to go back to their countries, to their homes. Without focusing on Astana process, after 10 years of war and fighting and killing and many problems, atrocities, etc., do you think a political solution is possible? Also, I would like to put this into equation, the occupation of the country by US and YPG terrorist groups for militants. So they are occupying the east part of the country. part of the country in the west is being controlled by opposition forces. Russians are there, Iranians are there. Turkey is controlling a part of the country because of security concerns. Do you think a political solution is possible at that phase, at that in this time of the conflict after a decade? Ömer, what do you say?
So we have to see that actually when it comes to return of refugees, that the Astana process and this round of negotiations might have an important impact on the stability and security in Syria and the requirements of humanitarian needs, because Russia still maintains its veto right over the cross-border aid of the United Nations towards Syria. If Russia would use its veto, this would mean that up to 2.5 to 3 million Syrians would not get any sufficient humanitarian aid, and this would massively decrease the living conditions in the north of Syria, and thus we would not speak about return of refugees, but even about new refugees, and this would be something very dangerous for the region. And in terms of return of refugees, the Astana committee called actually for early recovery aid and early assistance to Syria in order to ease the pain of the Syrians. And when it comes to a political solution, we have to clearly assess that we have a stalemate in Syria and we have a de facto partition into three different regions. We have on one side the Assad regime supported by Russia and Iran. On the other side, we have the YPG militants supported by the US and protected by Russia. And we have the Syrian interim government supported and protected by Turkey. So this three partial of Syria is something which has become somehow manifested and is somehow stable. However, it is not sustainable. There's a difference between being stable and being sustainable. And I think in the end of the period, after years, only we may be able to achieve a political solution in Syria. At the moment, neither the international system, nor the dynamics in Syria, nor the perceptions and perspectives of the actors involved in the conflict would enable a pathway towards a political solution. And a political solution is at the moment far away, and therefore the Astana process as a mechanism, as Kadir put it out, as to manage the conflict is quite efficient, but it will under these circumstances, it cannot produce a political solution for Syria. It's mission impossible.
Yeah, what is your take on this, Kadir?
Well, Ömer said it nicely. Political solution, in my opinion, it requires an agreement between a grand deal, bargaining and a major deal between great powers, United States, Russia, Iran, Turkey, potentially, and then you also have to have the regime and the opposition. But that has been impossible for the last decade, more than a decade. And there's no indication that, given the war in Ukraine, there's no indication that the US and Russia will be talking Syria anytime soon. For the United States, Syria is really bottom of the list of priorities these days. There's a presence there. It's justified under anti-ISIS fight, and Pentagon continues to fund it as part of its annual budget. So it is routine in many ways. It doesn't have a new impetus to do anything major on the political front. And you don't even hear in the US media these days much about the Astana process and what happens about the Geneva process. So without the involvement of an actor that has actually, troops on the ground, that claims to have serious interest about on the ground, and it claims to care about what happens to internally displaced people and refugees on the ground. It has humanitarian concerns. Without the inclusion of that power in diplomatic talks, political talks, we're not going to get anywhere. And as Ömer indicated, this is essentially a country that is split between 3 major regions, and these countries, including Turkey, Iran, Russia, are not going to give up their sort of zones that they control without a grand bargain. And even when we get to the grand bargain, that's going to have to somehow assure these countries of their respective national interests the way they define it. I don't see Turkey giving up on, the territories that it's holding without a serious change in the YPG threat, PKK threat, without a major, event there. So, long story short, we are far from a political solution anytime soon. It's much more about now management of the conflict and the fallout from the conflict. What happens to the refugees? Turkey has given up so much about the political process, to be honest, that it's now saying, I'm going to create these safe areas and I will repopulate it with some of the refugees who want to go back to their countries. So the countries have taken matters into their own hands, and there is no major sort of political process. This is unfortunate, of course, because this conflict continues to create instability, continues to produce humanitarian, challenges for the regional countries. It's a sad state of affairs, but it is what it is. And given the Ukraine war, I don't know if attention is going to turn to Syria anytime soon. And these regional countries, the countries that border Syria, that are affected directly by Syria, they are the ones who have the most at stake. And they're going to be the ones that both, make sure that there are some lasting solutions, piecemeal solutions on the ground, but they're also going to have to suffer the consequences of the ongoing conflict.
So the competition is going on, global and regional. The US, Russia, they have all interests, European powers, also Saudis, Israelis, Jordanians, as you have said, Iran and Turkey. There are competition between different countries, but let's focus on recent Turkish preparations for an intervention against YPG and PKK terror group. We in Turkey were expecting this operation to take place last week or the week before, but it seems that preparations are still underway. Ömer, what do you expect about this planned operation? Turkish president was very clear, and also Turkish defense minister, he also made statements about a possible upcoming operation against this terror group in the western part of the Euphrates River. Manbij is one of the targets of Turkey. Do you expect this operation to take place soon? And if it takes place, what will be the objectives of Turkish operation?
So to understand if a new military operation will occur in Syria, we have to look to the past year, actually, where the Turkish president announced that Turkey will also launch a new military operation. This operation was postponed due to the active cooperation between the United States of America and Russia, in which the US opened for the first time the airspace in the east of Syria to Russia, and Russia had deployed its fighter jets to the east of the country and thus prevented a new military operation by changing the balance of power. However, now there's a new opportunity for Turkey and the Syrian interim government, as the United States of America has remembered the geostrategic importance of Turkey and wants to preserve unity inside NATO. And Russia is occupied with the war in Ukraine, has lost its ability to supply its military presence in Syria via the sea, as Turkey has closed the straits under the Montreal Convention. And Turkey has also closed its airspace for any flights, military or civilian, to Syria and from Syria. And this leaves Russia with the only supply line via Iran, Iraq, and the east of Syria. So therefore, Russia is in a much weaker position, and we have seen that Russia has withdrawn some military forces from Syria towards Ukraine, and the economic sanctions imposed by the West, etc., and the war raging on Ukraine has all increased the position of Turkey and the Syrian government for a new possible military operation. So therefore, I vehemently reject the argumentation that this military operation is related to any sort of domestic considerations. No, it's not. It's actually the opportunity provided by the international system. However, that being said, will this new change of power enable a new military operation, or will the Russians still, despite their challenge in Ukraine, oppose this operation? We have seen so far that Russian military has conducted low altitude flights with helicopters over the north of Syria and even over areas controlled by the Syrian government, protected by the Turkish armed forces, and have deployed some air defense systems to the north of Syria. The Assad regime has sent massive reinforcements to protect the YPG militants, including heavy armor. So there is a rejection from the side of Russia and the Assad regime in coordination with Iran to protect the YPG against Turkey and the Syrian government. So this rejection has so far not prevented a new military operation, but this does not mean that it will not occur in the coming days, as this is an ongoing negotiation process. We know from the past that Russia tends to increase its military gear to make some sorts of deals and to come to some sorts of understandings before withdrawing from the area entirely. And it might be possible that this is some bargaining from the Russian side, and after some negotiations and after the Turkish seriousness and decisiveness, this operation still could be launched. And in regards to the timeline, I think the Astana talks will be important, but we may have to wait for a phone call between Erdogan and Putin for the next military operation in Syria.
May I add something to this, Bora?
Please.
Well, I think the kind of the picture that Ömer is painting is one where Turkey, neither Russia nor the United States, is able to assure Turkey. That's kind of what has been driving the Turkish operations. Remember, Turkey was promised that YPG was not a direct threat to Turkey. It was part of SDF, and it was only going to concern itself with ISIS. But we've seen them doing, things on the ground that, that threaten the security of Turkish-held territories. And when Turkey, brings this up, then, United States and Russia cannot offer lasting sort of assurances to Turkey that there will be no instability because of YPG, and that's I think that was one thing that really drove Turkey to announce this preparations for the operation, because they're not whole, because Turkey these days is being criticized for sort of violating the de-escalation agreements that it has struck with Russia and United States and others in the past. But what's happened, what transpired, is YPG attacks on several positions, even Turkish-held positions, and that's an ongoing problem. So I don't think Turkey is willing to look the other way when this happens, regardless of domestic politics, like Ömer said, and this will keep coming up. Yes, right now Russia might try to prevent Turkey from doing anything, but at the same time, the things are always moving on the ground. things are shifting. I mean, we just heard the news from Syria that Israel hit the Damascus airport. Occasionally, they have been hitting Iranian positions, Iranian assets inside Syria, and Russia is kind of unable to say much about that, or they have a tacit agreement, or both. I think a similar dynamic is happening here when Turkey sees its interests being threatened on the ground, then it decides to act, and sooner or later we're going to have some sort of operation, barring a serious assurance given to Turkey. Say, YPG will never come near this, border, and it will never do anything else. Even then, I don't think Turkey will trust the YPG anyway.
Actually, we had some agreements, but they were not implemented in this regard.
That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, the agreements were violated so many times that that's missing in the international media, and a lot of analysts ignore that, and they make it sound like Turkey is just deciding to do an operation out of nowhere.
None of the operation, Turkey has done 4 big operations in Syria during the last 6 years, and none of them was supported and understood by the Western countries, especially even we can not only Westerns but Russians also. And Turkey executed these operations despite the criticisms and denials of these countries. So if this 5th operation takes place, it will not be different, obviously. But do you think this operation has anything to do with recent discussions in NATO? Turkey is underlining the fact that Finland, Sweden, Germany, France, these countries are keeping supporting PKK, YPG, other terrorist organizations which are active in and around Turkey. Do you think this has anything to do with this Western attitude? Do you think Turkey wants to make it sure that its position is understood by the West? Whatever it takes, Turkey will fight against these organizations, terrorist organizations. Even the US or Russia or the countries that I named keep supporting them. Do you think this operation is also a sign or a show of will by Turkey?
So we have to see that the Turkish position in regards to Finland and Sweden joining NATO is that Turkey systematically supports the open door policy of NATO, but demands solidarity, as Sweden and Finland would be protected by NATO allies against a possible Russian attack. Turkey wants also to see the same kind of solidarity from Norway and from Sweden and Finland. However, I do not think that there will be any kind of quid pro quo, as some suggest, like Turkey launching this operation and accepting Sweden and Finland in return, or like this Russian special envoy for Syria indicated and claimed that Turkey cannot make a deal quid pro quo for not supporting Sweden and Finland into NATO, that Russia will green light a NATO operation. I do not think that this is the Turkish position. The Turkish position is separate. The situation in Syria is as it is, and the situation against Sweden and Finland is as it is. So it would be wrong from the Turkish perspective, and it will harm the Turkish arguments and weaken the Turkish position if Turkey would make this into something quid pro quo. Turkey wants to see solidarity, and for that, Sweden and Finland have to change their position in regards to the YPG, to the terrorist organization, and in regards to the PKK affiliated network in both states. So therefore, the situation in Syria does not have, from my perspective, anything to do with the Swedish and Finnish request to join NATO. But that being said, it is also clear that this will be some kind of a test, because once a new military operation is being launched, would Sweden and Finland show the same reaction as they did in 2019? Will they again impose an arms embargo against Turkey? Will they again declare their support to the YPG and provide the YPG with financial support? Will they again host the YPG's political representatives in the capitals? If they do so, this would clearly show that their position has not changed and there's no solidarity from Sweden and Finland towards Turkey, and thus Turkey will not show solidarity with them.
And Turkey is not happy with the attitude of Finnish and Swedish diplomats. Kadir, maybe before we close this show, maybe we should also talk about it, because talks in a way are underway. Turkey got some answers from Sweden and Finland, and Turkish foreign minister said they are not meeting Turkish expectations.
Yeah, we discussed NATO membership for these two countries. Ömer explained it nicely that, you know, the operation, of course, like these countries, for Turkey, the problem is not just the extradition of some terrorist, you know, individuals back to Turkey. It's also the political stance that these countries have taken in the past. It's not just like, you know, especially in Sweden, it's not simply expression of ideas, and, you know, some other European countries justify it in that sense, the PKK activities, and they say, you know, oh, it's freedom of expression, etc. It's not only that, but like Ömer described in previous operations, these countries, these governments, taking an active stance and condemning Turkish operations, and then on top of it, even daring to impose some sanctions on military sales. So it's a political question, ultimately. Turkey feels like it needs to get assurances from Sweden and Finland, which would be also, I think, an example for others, including the United States, about how to approach Turkey's concerns about security. And we've discussed this many times in this program, Bora. Turkey has been sort of, what do you say? Turkey has been talking about this. Turkey has been making a lot of noise about security issues for a long time, for many years now. It was only when the large numbers of refugees arrived in Europe that many Europeans turned around and started to try to listen to Turkey. So now it's, you know, now that, you know, Russia invaded Ukraine and security is a real issue for Europeans. Now they're rethinking everything that Turkey has been bringing up for years. So there's been a mismatch about this, and Turkey, before accepting to, you know, agree to the inclusion of Finland and Sweden in the NATO alliance, they want guarantees. Turkey wants guarantees that, you know, we are going to look at terrorism through a similar framework. We're not going to, of course, agree on everything, but are you going to, like, you know, condemn my operations when I'm, you know, trying to seal my border against an organization that has killed 40,000 people over the last 4 decades? Or are you going to, you know, show solidarity, like Ömer was saying? So it is a serious question, I think. NATO alliance is, you know, one attack is on a member is supposed to be an attack on another, which implies common defense. You're supposed to run to each other's defense. But if you don't have agreement on the basic definition of basic implications of terrorism on the ground, how are you going to get there? So that's going to be actually a weaker NATO, not a stronger one. So I think Turkey's objections and reservations are helping to strengthen NATO in a weird way, right? So we're going to see that play out in Madrid at the end of the month. We'll probably talk about this in future occasions, but like Ömer indicated, this is very Turkey's understanding of security environment, Turkey's understanding of its national security is quite mature by now, right? It's been dealing with terror organizations, it's been dealing with major regional powers, heavyweights on the ground, doing military operations in Libya, Caucasus, Syria, etc. So that kind of maturity is not always matched by a lot of European countries who have been getting their strategic sort of advice or leadership from the United States. So I think it's going to be healthy for NATO to rethink and think deeply about these issues.
Yeah, as you said, it's not only Finland and Sweden. Also, when Turkey is pushing for these two countries to, review their policies about PKK and YPG, we have seen trainings in France and in Germany. It's like challenging what Turkey is trying to do. What do you say, Ömer, about this? We have seen PKK terrorists, marching in France, also in Germany, big protest. I'm not looking at my notes. There are 14,000 followers of PKK in Germany, for example.
So this is according to the to the German intelligence report, the Bundesverfassungsschutz. But the problem with this number is actually that the same report states that PKK events and demonstrations in Germany are attended by 40,000 people. So if the PKK has a base of 14,500 people, how are the demonstrations being attended by the triple size of that number? So actually, the real number is even higher than the German intelligence report indicates. And the German intelligence report even itself has some quite funny statements. For instance, PKK members conducting a demonstration and going into this train and doing some vandalism and showing PKK signs and making propaganda for the PKK are being punished by German law, not for supporting a terrorist organization, not for being a member of a terrorist organization, not for chanting terrorist slogans, but for not buying a ticket for the train. So quite German, actually. And this attitude of the European states to not actually deal with the PKK as a terrorist organization as they would do, have done in the case of ISIS, for example, is something which makes the fight against terrorism much more difficult. Because the PKK is not only engaged in child recruitment, suicide attacks, terror attacks, bomb attacks, and IED attacks, but it's also engaged in drug trafficking, in money laundering, in forcing money from the people. And all of these criminal activities of the PKK are mostly present in Europe, like drug trafficking, money laundering, etc. And none of them are really targeted by the European NATO allies of Turkey. And this is something which the Turkish side is always criticizing and demanding more solidarity from its NATO allies. And for instance, if we would have the opposite situation, like let's imagine after the attacks of ISIS in France, which shocked the nation, that some ISIS supporters in Turkey would march in a camp and wear ISIS clothes and chant ISIS slogans, and the Turkish police would not intervene and do anything against them, this would be perceived as active Turkish support for ISIS. But when PKK members do the same in France, this is not an issue, and it's all the Turkish hysteria and the Turkish paranoia, and it's been downgraded to some Turkish demands which are not real to the reality of the situation. So this double standard in targeting terrorist organizations and combating against terrorism is the actual root of the problems between Turkey and its NATO allies. And until this double standard does not end, I do not think that these problems will be solved. And I do also not think that the PKK threat will be eliminated, because Turkey can fight against the PKK inside Turkey, in northern Iraq, in northern Syria, but the PKK in Europe, this is an area the European states have to do and have to make the fight against terrorism. But unfortunately, they are not. And as long as this network of PKK elements and money laundering and drug trafficking maintains in Europe, the PKK's terror activities inside Turkey will always find the financial support, the manpower support, and the logistical support it needs.
Yeah, it seems that Turkish president will bring this issue whenever he meets with European leaders, and Turkey's stand will not change, I believe. So we will see what will happen in NATO summit in Madrid. So thank you, Ömer Özkızılcık and Kadir Üstün, and my Bora Bayraktar. Hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching.